We should be live. I'm gonna keep it like this for a bit until probably 7:05. I'm just gonna chill out on the first screen, just so you know I don't start early and nothing else happens. So while I'm just here, I'm just gonna prattle on for a bit, and we'll get started at 5:05. It's been a busy time. As I said, I tried to make a video about London Games Week and about Godot Con. Initially I went skating and I just recorded it, and I thought I'd just go skate and I'd record the audio and boom, bish bash, done. Turns out the audio wasn't very good, and then I tried to re-record it a few times, and basically honestly, I came to the conclusion that no one's really interested in what I was going to say about London Games Week and Godot, in the sense of just repeating what I think a lot of people would be repeating, and I wasn't articulating it in the best way, so I was like, no, I'll skip that. So yeah, I'm going to be doing this, as I say, we'll wait until 5:05, and then I'll get cracking with the actual slides. But yeah, I figured this is the only thing I really need to cover. And even this, I'm really just doing because I think that there was just stuff I missed out, and I felt like I really sped through it when I was actually at the con, and I was very tired. I was very, very tired. So, yeah, thought I'd do this. Also, I thought, honestly, that the talks would be streamed. They were recorded, and all the Godot Con talks will be live at some point. Don't know when. But anyway, I thought while this was fresh in my mind and while it was bugging me, I'd give an extended version of the talk live. So that is the plan. I haven't timed the extended version. I threw in a few slides that I cut out before going to the con, and I just put in some sort of title slides to help me sort of split it up. And yeah, I'm just gonna go through it. I'm not gonna rush. As I say, we'll start at 5:05. In fact, you know what? Let me actually just pop up some text there that says that to the effect. Talk will start at 5:05 the hour. Just in case, so I don't have to constantly repeat that piece of information. Oh dear, that needs to go black. Does it not? Does it not? Does it not? Does it not? Where is colour in here? Believe it or not, there was a large point in my time where I actually, did spend time streaming, but that has been a very long time. Oh, there's colour. There is colour. Back in the bad old days of Justin TV and early StarCraft stuff. You know, it's what you get for being an esports kiddie. Oh, you enjoyed the talk at Godot Con. Oh, I'm very glad. I mean, this is just going to be the talk repeated with some extra bits in it. And so I have a recording as well. Because, as I say, there will be a recording from Godot Con, but I don't know when it'll go live. And I just wasn't personally happy with my delivery of it. So, as I say, also an opportunity to ask questions, because I overran. So there was not even time for questions at the actual event, which was a bit of a bummer. But yeah, no, so I did, as I said, I went skating and I recorded a thing about Godot Con and London Games Week. I suppose I'll give this short shimmy on that. London Games Week, the finance market was a lot more positive this year round. Obviously, the games finance market's like a big funding opportunity for a lot of people. And I was just hearing more positive chatter this year, which was good to hear. We've had a rough few years in terms of funding. I will say, though, that one thing I did sort of hear from everyone in London Games Week is the budgets have just gone down. Everyone's asking for less money. The whole industry's sort of adapted to a different financing model. And a lot of people are looking for money in different places now. So, yeah. No, definitely a different economic climate. It's funny, I was saying to someone actually at London Games Week, I remember back when we would sign porting checks, like no strings attached, here's just some money, just bring your game to our console. And we used to sign those pretty much off the back of a deck or a pitch, sometimes a prototype. Like, it didn't take much to get that. And I mean, that's not even like rev share or anything. That was just literally money to bring it to a console. And then, like, after Strategic Content set that up, then Ninja at Xbox basically copied our playbook, which all fair do, wanted them to copy it. And so even more money was there. And then as they were winding down, Nintendo started doing it with Nindies. I don't know any of the people at Nintendo who were involved with it. But yeah, no, so anyway, there was this period of just money, and I mean, like, no strings attached money as well, which was crazy to think. But yeah, we're just in a different world now, absolutely different world. It's fun to see the cycle and everything that goes through. But yeah, I'll wait 3 more minutes and then I will start the actual talk and get onto that. Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it at Godot Con. As I say, it does seem to have gone over well. I was just so knackered that I just don't think I gave a very good version of it. And as I said, I had to really compress it down. So this is the exact same talk, just a few more slides thrown in, and I'm going to go a bit slower. So apologies for the repetition. But yeah, no, it's really meant for people who didn't see the talk or just wanted more of it. So feel free to ask questions as we go. I'll fill in bits. I'm not under a time limit. People can skip ahead when I ramble or whatever. So it's no big deal. I will say that I think that the role of conferences is changing somewhat, because we're in a world now where the best place to actually get a talk is online, and so honestly the best place to do a talk is online. So, and because, you know, people can skip through and rewind and double speed and all that jazz. So the main value of the conference is really questions and workshops and networking and those kind of things. Like the traditional thing of, you know, you go to a conference and then someone presents work, you know, sort of academic style, is kind of lost its value a bit, just because it's not the best venue. Then again, like, my favorite conferences were always like behind closed door conferences where everyone's like on the specific NDAs or part of a specific company, and you can just talk numbers and you can talk details. Those were always great because it was like co-workers just sharing details with each other, really. No filter, which is super handy and useful, because then you can also go like, you know, can I get that code or can I get this? And yeah, it's super great. Okay. Let's get that text gone. Sorry about that. That was just so I have it. Right. Shipping VR games in Godot. Troubles, victories, and realities. Who am I? I'm Claire Blackshaw. I've been doing this since the PS2 era. I've been in small studios, and I've been in big studios, and I've been part of corporations. You know, so I've been a programmer, I've been a designer, I've been a consultant. I've been in VR since 2013, so I've been doing this a long time. Was involved in PlayStation and PSVR 2 stuff and OpenXR. And when I left games briefly, I went to Adobe as their main IC for XR work. So I was doing like all of the collaboration stuff with like Apple and Meta and all those kind of stuff, and Pico, and building their XR engine primarily for Modeler, but you know, doing that. So anyway, a bunch of experience across the industry. So that's the thing. Why is the talk extended? Honestly, 30 minutes was too short. I didn't write a 30-minute talk. That's my bad. I was just so excited to sort of put it in, and I was very tired. My delivery was a bit poor, and honestly, I just wanted to put a bit more positive advice in. I felt like the talk came off a bit negative in the end. So I did want to put a few more actionable items in there. So let's talk about what we shipped. So the key question is, can Godot ship commercial VR? And it can, because we've done it. We've shipped it. So that's the short answer. Yes. Yay. The sad part is it cost us about 80 grand more than if we had done it in Unity or Unreal. I don't think Unreal would have been a practical choice for us, given the game choice and the performance targets, but Unity would have been. and we probably would have shipped at a slightly higher quality with that. There's reasons not to, and there's a longer answer there, but let's go into it. So why Godot? Honestly, tech freedom. I got into Godot, as I said, when I was working at Adobe. A big concern of mine is not enough devs are working directly with the XR APIs, and generally we have a sort of tech problem where when I was working on PlayStation, I really started to notice, but I noticed before then, was because everything's on Unity or Unreal, people aren't getting their hands into the technology, and we're not sort of developing that stack. And so it's somewhat of a giving back mindset that made me choose Godot. Maybe not the best business decision. It's modular by design. You replace what you need, which is really good. Sources available, so anything is actually solvable with time. You can do anything with time. The other thing is, I say, all those studios I've worked at, I've primarily worked on custom engines. I have shipped games on Unity and Unreal. I was actually a very early user of Unity when the iPhone 3G, or was it 3GS, launched, and there was the first port of Unity to Windows, and did stuff with that. So anyway, the other big thing is platformer holders assume you don't exist. So when you're trying to raise money or get support from from holders like from Nintendo or PlayStation or whatever, you have issues there. That doesn't necessarily, that is improving, but it hits you in surprising ways. I'll give you an example. We were working with a trailer company recently, talking to them about quotes, and they asked us, you got a Live license, right? And we were like, no, because Live is kind of the standard way to capture VR games for trailers, and Godot doesn't support Live, whereas Unity and Unreal do. So these kind of things constantly come up. The other thing is publishers only see a risk. They only see it's an engine they're not familiar with, and everyone is quite risk averse. So the true cost of that freedom came for us on this title to about 80 grand in labor. That's not a made up number. That is a number that I've had to work out and put down in terms of what tax can I get back and how can I think. So I did have to sit down and work that out. But you do pay it as code and labor fees, not as license fees and plugins. That is the difference. And obviously you own all of this work free and clear, and there are tax credits and things you can do for it. But the biggest challenge is selecting an engine or technology stack. It's one of the most important decisions you make as a studio or on a particular game. And while a lot of the benefits I'm talking about are long term, the honest truth is your biggest challenge as an indie or as a small studio is basically getting to profit and surviving. There's a phrase I love, which is turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. And if your business isn't making money, it's not a business. And none of us are trying to make crazy amounts of money. We do just want to keep getting paid so we can keep making games, and that's the reality of it. So I'm going to let the trailer play there. I've muted the audio. So this is actually our third or fourth Godot game, depending how you measure it. It's Sudoku in VR. There's a bunch of other comfortable logic puzzles that we're bringing. We're going to bring nonograms soon. We're bringing a bunch of other sort of VR variants and other modes that we want to bring in. But fundamentally, the pitch day one was it's Sudoku in VR. So the first thing that I try to build is an actual commercial game in Godot. I think this is Godot 4.0, 4.1 we're trying to do this in. And this was still while I was working at Adobe because my contract allowed me to do commercial video games. So because I've been working on Dreams for a very long time, and then I was working on Modeler, my head is firmly in the volumetric space. I still want to do a game with volumetrics. But we got blocked fundamentally because I was like, I need to find out what is possible on a Quest headset. And I started doing some experiments. I'm like, a Quest headset could do this. I know a Quest headset could do this. Turns out it couldn't be done in Godot. The renderer was missing some indirect draw dispatch stuff that we needed on the rendering side. Most of that is actually now kind of in there, and I could see a way to do it now in Godot. But frankly, we also would need the performance edge. So that was a title that we will probably do in the future, but it's shelved entirely for technical reasons, because we figured out Godot wasn't the right choice for it, wasn't the right engine. So that was our first frustration with Godot, for we can't build that game. The next game we built was called Rune Magic. We got to sort of prototype phase and realized the idea itself kind of sucked. The next one was the one we actually took the furthest along, and this was the Magic Shop title. It's based on my wife's book series, and we had to solve a lot of physics issues with this. Jolt wasn't yet the standard. We did experiment with Jolt, and then we switched over to an early plugin of Jolt before it was like the default. But even then we found that we were coding a lot of custom physics responses. And the big thing is, this is also when we got some funding lined up from Meta, and we also got a publisher, well actually 2 publishers interested in it. But as this was happening, I was like, okay, well now I need to leave Adobe and actually set up the company, because conflicts of interest and blah, blah, blah. And so I did that, and then let's just say the funding environment changed. Contracts got yanked. One of the publishers went out of business. Things were not good. So we were all of a sudden in a situation where the scope and the market didn't align. I also got my hands on some like background sales data, and it was like, no, this is not the right game to build now. But we could have built that with Godot. I was very concerned about Godot's character animator being strong enough, but I had ideas on technically how to work around that. So the pivot is because of this thing, the Logitech pen. So I worked with Logitech when I was at Adobe to help develop this pen. And as it was coming up to commercial shipping, I was like, I'll get the interaction profile into Godot, and I'll sort of do this simple drawing app to sort of prove the pen works. My picture's in the way of the video. Let me just move it there. So prove that the pen works in Godot. And as I'm doing this, I realized this is really fun, and I start sort of playing noughts and crosses, and I turn around and I'm like, oh no, because it's really fun, I kind of want to play Sudoku now. And I went onto the VR stores looking for a Sudoku game. There wasn't a Sudoku game, and I was like, this is a really good opportunity. I've got a relationship with Logitech, so maybe I can get some support from them, and I really like Sudoku. Let's build this thing. And I was also like, we will not hit any technical limitations with Godot, because this is a basic enough idea that I'm not going to be worried about Godot being able to do it. You know, it's like I have scoped the idea to what I'm sure the engine is capable of. And so this is my favorite part about Godot, is that, I'll just move that out of the way again there. My favorite part of Godot is how quickly you can stand up projects. And this is where Godot really shines. We got the game up and playable in 2 days, and then we got the full menu flow and everything, all the main parts of the game fleshed out in a week. This isn't obviously the full thing, but we were like, we could get it out in 3 months. Minimal viable product, 3 months. This is doable. And we were like, okay, this is actually really perfect for VR, because we wanted seated, head down, low fatigue, pass through, you know, get all those comfort issues in there, focus on iteration, get it really, really polished. And we figured this is something 100% we can do. Turns out it was a little bit more complicated than that. Okay, before I go into the technical issues, this is one of the slides I added. I do want to talk a bit about some of the cool things we built for the game. You know, it's not just, you know, people think Sudoku and it's quite simple. It turns out, actually, it's harder than you think. In fact, it's a lot harder than coding a lot of other games. First thing is we built a full solver and hint system. So this is a constraint solver AI where it can solve any kind of logical puzzle, and it can also generate those puzzles. Now, we hand set all of our puzzles, but having code that can generate the puzzles means that the tools that we use to hand set them make hand setting puzzles a lot easier and intuitive. But it also means that when a person is playing the game, we can provide hints to them in a way that a human would solve it, not in a way a computer would solve it. which is trickier than it sounds. We also had to build a whole solver framework, so we can do not just Sudoku, but other things, and use the same AI and the same framework in there. But it was also things like putting infinite undo and redo in there, and the groundwork for multiplayer. Like, we're going to be shipping multiplayer at some time, and I know that if I built the game in a specific way, it would be good for multiplayer in the future. And then doing things like, I know that I wanted to do cloud saves because I wanted to be on a lot of devices, so doing save merging and compression stuff. And then the other thing is those balls, which you would have seen literally in our very first early menu demos. The reason for these balls is actually to do with like some primary comfort things of, as you move through the title, those balls provide you visual continuity. So even though the menus are flicking on and off, you get a high degree of comfort moving across those menus. So they were really critical, and for that we had to hit frame rates and do that. We had to do stuff with compute shaders, and then all the balls are actually boxes, and we use sort of a fake last ray trace thing like in the fragment shader to make perfect spheres out of boxes to hit our quality goals. So that's some of the cool stuff that we put in the game that I don't talk about much in this talk, but wanted to highlight it. So technical issues. The first thing is controllers, composition, and punch through. So if all the different VR controllers are very, very different, but one of the nicest things that if you're on a Meta headset you can use, and a few other people support this as well, is you can do a render model, and it literally just renders the exact controller that you're currently using and in the perfect position, and it animates all the buttons, and that's really great. But it's not on every platform, and so that's very frustrating. So initially it looked really good, we had that, but then we were like, okay, but because we need a controller on another platform and we don't want it to be visually inconsistent, we're going to have to do the work anyway, we now have to make our hand controller, so there's a few frustrating things like that. Also, you'll notice in the early prototype we had this 2D in 3D look. So we were using the 2D parts of Godot basically in a viewport, but not actually in a viewport. We were using something that the XR team had built called composition layers, where you get much higher resolution renders. It's very good for rendering images on a plane or text on a plane in a 3D environment. So if you're watching YouTube in VR or whatever, you use this extension, and the hardware does really clever stuff to basically get a higher resolution image. But again, not available on every piece of hardware, which is a bit of a problem. Pass-through we thought of as a requirement. Wherever headsets supported it, we want to support it. But then we had this problem that slowed us down with Godot, which again, the team, we got fixed relatively quickly, but we were having issues with render targets and punch through with these composition layers and how they worked with pass-through. Of course, there's some issues there. The key problems here is OpenXR extensions are not universal. Depending on which platform you're on, different extensions will work in different places. The other thing is we haven't even talked about PSVR 2 and Apple Vision, which are both not OpenXR headsets. So those were some of the struggles we had on the OpenXR side. The other thing, which honestly caused about 6 months of delays, is personal family issues. The short version is, at one point I had my brain going, oh no, I've got to maybe go to my mum and my wife's funeral this year. They're fine. But we had a lot of friends get cancer. We had one friend die. So we had a lot of things going on. And if I'd just been working at a tech company still, or a games company, I would have taken 6 months leave. But unfortunately, running my own studio just burned money for 6 months. And I also tried to work through it, which was not the smartest idea. Okay, so then we also started hitting issues with working with the stack. When you are shipping a game, you generally work off a fixed version of the engine and you try not to upgrade, but then you have to make fixes to the engine because of all these issues we're talking about. Godot has a real issue with API churn. renames are done as part of other commits. Renames should be separate commits. People should not be renaming variables in the same commit. It's frustrating how often that happens and is accepted, and by top tier contributors, because cherry picks are a very common process for professional libraries or engines by studios, because you don't want to upgrade to the new version of Godot. You want to get that one specific commit that fixes the bug that you have or the problem you have, and so you want to cherry pick that commit. It's a git command, git cherry pick. And the more things are moved around or renamed without a real purpose, the less likely cherry picking is practical. We also had an issue, which I'll go into the talk later, where someone renamed something and it actually broke our build script, and there was no reason to do it. There was no behavioral change, and it was thrown in a commit that was about something completely different. Squash commits, I think, also make merges harder, and I think they also make the reviewers' jobs harder. I know it's the standard thing that Go does, but I would generally advocate for a cleaned up commit stack, but where you've stacked the commits of here's this layer, here's this layer, here's this layer, here's this layer, because it's easier to review the different layers and commits. And again, when it comes to cherry picking, it's easier to identify which pieces you need. And finally, we really just need to move to a culture of deprecating and not renaming stuff. They're really, even if something has a spelling error in it or a typo in it or isn't clear, we should be aliasing it, fixing the typo or spelling error, making a duplicate function name, and basically putting deprecated on old function names. This API churn in Godot burnt us a lot and made a lot of the issues I'm going to talk about harder for us to deal with. There's a lot of rendering stories in here. The reason there's so many rendering stories in here is because OpenXR and the XR generally is meant to drive the renderer. You know, it's meant to give you the monitor effectively and set up the frame buffers and do all that kind of stuff. OpenXR is in the driving seat by design, but it's not by design in most engines, including Godot. Godot is one of the best for this. Godot's OpenXR is best in class, and the XR team is really doing well there. The other thing is, in XR, we push the limits of what you can do, especially in standalone. But even in PC VR and console VR, XR is technically at the edge of what processors can do, and you have to hit it. And unfortunately, that means we pay the tax. We have to hit frame budgets. We have to hit certain targets that, frankly, if you're not making a VR game, you don't have to hit. So the XR team is the most likely to feel, or XR devs are most likely to feel any kind of performance problems in an engine. The other thing I want to say is the rendering team on Godot is stretched very thin. Rendering programmers are hard to get. The code's difficult to review. It's complex. And they have to serve a lot of clients, not just XR. They have to serve everything from shitty Android phones and web all the way through to consoles. So it is a tough challenge there, and there's no shade there, only appreciation, but it needs to be highlighted. Okay, so the first big break we had was Label 3D. As I said, 3 months trying to get to the MVP, even in the crisis that I was in with health and family and everything, we were basically at the point of shipping a friends and family build. But then we hit this thing that basically made performance just untenable, which was a shocker for us because there's nothing in the game. I thought maybe it's my balls. I turned the little flying around balls off. Yeah, that gets me a bit more headroom, but performance is still terrible. And this is the thing that is not clear with a lot of these issues. I'm highlighting what the issue is, but what I'm not showing you is how long it takes us to figure this out. Because the Label 3D thing, for example, doesn't immediately manifest and go, your frame budget's been used up because it takes ages to draw a bunch of text on the screen. No, the frame calls were actually fine. The issues were we were getting spikes, and we were getting spikes when when things were changing. What we didn't realize is whenever we added a Label 3D to the scene graph, and it didn't show up immediately because we were like, but it's not happening when you add it. It's happening when it enters the world, and basically it's constructing the meshes for the Label 3D behind the scenes, because every single glyph, every single character in a string had a unique material. Now, this was under the assumption that the material cache further down would save you. First of all, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure that is true, and even if it is true, there's a lot of thrashing that goes on. The other issue we had is the MSDF fonts had a bug that just had terrible quality, so we were having to turn up the resolution of the font to make it not look shit. And so we've got all of these materials flying around, chewing up VRAM, setting up, thrashing the asset pipeline because Godot doesn't have a bindless pipeline, and it all looks kind of shit. So now we have to solve all of this. Now, since MSDF issues have been fixed, but we had to have come up with our own solution. Now, I want to call out Z at this point in time. He's the dev behind Penguin Festival. I found this out after I solved the problem ourselves. He hit the same problem, and he just used text mesh. So there's my short answer. If you hit the problem at the moment and you've got this performance trouble, just use text mesh. It's not ideal. You are going to be rendering way more than you should be rendering. You're going to be burning a bit more frame time. But if you've got a bit of text in your game, or you've got menus that need dynamic text, text mesh is a workaround. And if you're not following him, by the way, he's one of the most entertaining VR devs to follow that uses Godot at the moment. He's fantastic. So we came up with this thing called fast text. The primary thing was, okay, all of this material junk has got to go. We've got to make something that uses one material. And so we had the share font resource where multiple fonts could point at the same resource and go, I'm using the same font as this other label. And we stripped out some of the functionality that very fancy, cool features. And this is a global problem in Godot where it's like, here's a fancy, cool feature. Have you thought about how that affects performance? Because the honest truth is, if you're making a 2D game or whatever, you don't care. But for anyone who does care about performance, it's a nightmare. So at the moment, we're doing a single draw call per text node, which is not ideal, but it works for us. I would like for us to get to a single draw for all the text in its own pass. It's very doable. It's on my future radar. The other thing is I want to move away from MSDF fonts to proper GPU-driven fonts where we're actually constructing the splines on the GPU. This is very much how Slug font works. It's really great. Unfortunately, there's a proprietary library, and last I checked, it didn't have a Godot version. Honestly, if it had a Godot version, I probably would have just paid him the money and taken it, because we used that at Adobe and such, and it's a fantastic library. Good news though is there is this wonderful library here from Green Lightning on GPU font rendering, and it's one of my future goals to actually port that into our branch and make a PR out of that, which is why I haven't tried to submit our fast text back work. Also, I don't think our fast text work would vibe with the main branch because it takes features away. But yeah, it's doable as an add-on. Anyway, so that's fast text. Platform libs. So the next issue we had is, if most Godot devs, if you're making a game for Steam or whatever, using Godot Steam, it's very good. The problem is we need to work not only on Steam but on Nintendo. Well, not on Nintendo. We need to work on PlayStation, and we need to work on Meta. But, you know, I'm thinking in my head, okay, I need to be ready for all this different stuff. And I don't want to have a different add-on for every single platform because that's a pain in the neck. And the other thing is, I don't know what level of compliance these add-ons have. Because especially companies have a very high standard for data control. The EU and GDPR and data controller laws, especially in the UK, are extremely strict. You have to register a data controller. This is one of those things I'd say, even if you're an indie, be very, very careful. Be aware of how you're tracking that. Make sure you've got your privacy policies. Make sure you've got your EULAs. We also needed a surface that actually did all of our API rate limiting correctly. and we needed to account for cross-platform. So we looked at a bunch of different options. We chose Epic Online Services. They provide that for free. You don't have to use Epic accounts. You can auth it with Meta or auth it with Steam or PlayStation. So that's why we're using it. But yeah, so that's really, it's like you've really got to hit it. It's really important you get this right. So we came up with this thing called backend unified middleware. It's honestly just a joke because I wanted to call it BUM because I wanted it to deal with platform shit. So it's one API for Steam, Meta, Epic, PS5, and in the future other platforms. It has an offline demo mode for trade shows, which is important for us. It has multi-slot save with cloud merge. Cloud merge is always like day one being a big deal for me. And we have an auth stage that we know are compliant with regulation. So we know what it does and we can report and write down what it does. Okay, extensions versus modules versus add-ons. I think if you're making a commercial game, you're going to admit at some point the engine's going to fork. But the less you put into the engine, the better. We had a lot of pain here as well. This is actually where we lost a lot of time because they're not 100% the same. And while we had some stuff that was initially a module, Godot had, I can't remember which version of Godot this was, it had an issue where the build cache was breaking. So our build times were awful. Scones was taking a lot of time every time we iterated on the modules that were doing the platform stuff. So then we had to move it out into an extension, and when we did that, we had a lot of issues with the Epic library and the Meta library linking through the extension on Android, and we ended up having to set up a JNI bridge so we could go from the Java stuff to the C++ stuff, and we had to like link it in a way that both Epic and Meta were happy with because they expected certain things in the Android activity layer to be done. And yeah, we had to set up a whole bunch of stuff with CMake and build chains, and it was just a fucking pain, honestly. It was a huge pain. And the sort of default template extension that's provided for Android is, yeah, it's an interesting pipeline. So yeah, the build cache incident. We also had an issue where because something was renamed in Godot, we didn't realize it initially, but it was breaking our builds silently in the background. Because we had pulled in some fixes for something else that we needed fixed, and someone had renamed a key part of our build pipeline. We didn't realize it. It was failing silently because they hadn't even put an error check in of like, hey, you're using an old thing, it's going to fail. They had just renamed it as part of another commit, and it really fucked us because we thought it was something unrelated performance-wise that was causing issues because we were tracking down issues with, I think this was around when we were doing the fast text work. It might have also been around when I was debugging some stuff around fragment shaders and fill rates or the thing, but we had performance issues and we were doing things and we weren't seeing them fixed, and eventually we figured out was, oh, our APKs aren't getting all the things packed in they need packed in because this one thing's failing. It was eventually solved. We now have better infrastructure. We now have a build system based on Jenkins, and we do more checks and such. But that caused us a lot of pain, and it wasn't even necessary. It was a totally unnecessary rename. Okay, Splash submission. This was the next thing that broke us. So we're now on goal to hit the Christmas window. For those of you who don't know, the Christmas window is actually quite big for VR because the amount of headsets that are gifted at Christmas is very high. So there's a big spike of VR Christmas use. I think there's also I don't have solid data on this. I have solid data on the sales, but there's, I think, also a spike of people showing off their headsets to their family members around this time. but there's definitely a sales spike. So Christmas is an important window. We were ready to ship. We had all of our ducks in a row. Everything was lined up. But one of these compliance issues is if you're making a game with pass-through, Meta requires VRC14 that when you're booting the game, you're in a transparent environment with the logo. And it was working, but then it stopped working because Meta updated the OS and they fucked us. Turns out they changed an undocumented API, and there was no documentation anywhere I could find in the forums, in the official website, anywhere. Thankfully, in a private Discord, some other VR devs I know, some who worked on Unreal, were like, hey, maybe check this out because this changed. So what had changed is in the Android manifest, they changed the default type from mono to stereo, and that requires a different setup. I don't know what the different setup is, but the solution was we had to update Godot's Android manifest that it was building to support, to explicitly state mono and the color space, as well as the background pass-through contextual. So that fucked us. We missed the Christmas shipping date, and that was just a thing that if we were on Unity or Unreal wouldn't have happened, because when I say that people don't realize Godot exists, this is one of those places it shows up. Because Meta, when they made this change to the OS, they clearly tested it on Unity and Unreal, and they just didn't test it on Godot. So that was a cost for us. Okay, on the render stuff that I'm about to talk about, you'll see a big pattern that keeps coming up. Trying to move things to a single draw call, trying to replace the default Godot shader or pipeline because it's too heavy or it's not optimal for I/O reasons. There's a lot of resource stuff in Godot that is not the best performance because it's built in a different way. Moving stuff, compute and trying to make it threaded for heavy work as much as possible, because in VR we never want those frame spikes. You just never want to have a spike like that. Yes, there's asynchronous space warp and a lot of things to help you, but those things will always lead to more nausea and discomfort. And the other thing is that the engine defaults are optimized for the general case, not for XR or high performance. Okay, so the first thing is the magnetic balls. So those balls I mentioned that fly around in the menus, they are there for your comfort. They help smooth out the experience for you. They really help with visual discontinuity because if your eye has something to lock on and track as menus are disappearing and you're having scene transitions, it really helps. The whole sort of cut to back or fade to back or crossfade is actually kind of nauseous driven. Not a crazy amount, but you'd be amazed at how much these things sort of add fatigue to the user. So much of comfort is not necessarily about, oh, I feel sickly. It's just about how much are you asking from the user and how much fatigue are you doing there. Originally, it was CPU-driven physics. We always knew it was going to be too heavy, and we moved it over to GPU. But in the initial versions of Godot that we were using, we still had to round trip from compute to the CPU to the draw calls because it was a big problem. Wonderfully, there was an addition that was made, and this would have helped us with the digging game as well. So we moved the balls to multi-mesh, which they're all a single draw call now, and there are those fake box balls I talked about. We tuned the work groups. All of the shaders, all of the physics is compute shader driven, but then we also changed it to use an async multi-mesh update. So we no longer had to go through the CPU, and this was because some work of a renderer programmer who I still forgot to dig out the name of, but they made it possible that you can set multi-mesh buffers directly through RIDs. And if you're working with multi-mesh, I highly recommend you look at that because it's a great feature. Small optimizations lead to big wins. So multi-mesh bashing, this was taking a lot of stuff that was multiple meshes in Blender and making sure it's a single mesh, making sure things are the same material so they can be batched up and drawn all at once. Moving stuff to palette-based shaders using UV tricks. So instead of using textures on anything, we used the UVs and then shader trickery to color stuff based on theming. So we didn't have to use any samplers, and we didn't have to fill up the fragment frame time with texture sampling. Also, when we were doing texture sampling, as much as possible, we tried to do single channel texture sampling. Again, just data I/O and throughput. We disabled shadows, the fake ball boxes I mentioned, we fake specular, and then we basically managed to get it running at 72 or 90 frames depending on your headset. The next thing I'd say that we learned is giving back is really hard. The first ever Godot PR I did, and I've spoken about this before, was plane ray intersection test was broken in Godot. It was broken in Godot since Godot was first introduced on Git, so over a decade. But because the engine primarily uses segment plane intersection, no one noticed. There wasn't even a unit test for ray plane, but ray plane is a faster algorithm than segment plane, so but that took ages to get in, and every commit since then has taken ages to get in. On this particular issue, what happened is we needed a feedback system, because I don't know if you know, Subnautica was one of the first to do this really nice feedback system. It's influenced by the thing you used to see at airports and things like that, where you get the emojis that you push. And Charlie came up to me and he was pitching this, and he basically went, we're gonna do this game, because this was also when procedural generation was all the rage. We're gonna do this game, but we're gonna make the entire world by hand. And the feedback system, which allowed people to push the feedback button in early access, take a screenshot, but also capture a little bit of data about where they are on the map and whatnot, and send an emotion through with maybe a bit of text, and that screenshot was really pivotal to them doing this work. So we put this in, but when we did this, it was a pretty generic system, and I was like, let me share this back, because basically capturing the frame buffer in regular games is super easy, but in XR you just can't do it at the moment, because it's broken. So I made a capture XR pipeline that not only screenshotted exactly what you're seeing in XR, but it did it in a way where it didn't have any performance connotations, not any serious performance connotations. There's a very little bit of it, but it like reused the thing that we were blitting to the screen. And then I also made it so it was threaded, and it was great. But we only needed the Vulkan path, so then I also did a bit of extra work to get the compatibility renderer working with it, and I put it all together, gave it over to the XR team. They were like, looks good, we'll get this reviewed, we'll get it in. And just before it goes in, the render team makes a change that fucks it, and fucked a bunch of other PRs. And it's like, okay, XR is just one part of it, fine, but this has happened to us in a lot of times when we've tried to give back to the community. Various XR minor bits, the Logitech pen, collision issues, we've worked really hard to try and give back to Godot. But it is tough sometimes, it is tough. But this is in the context of that money spent and time spent. Okay, so this was the reason I was so tired at Godot Con, is I had this deadline for Logitech that I had to deliver out. So this was another bit of work that we had to finish up. So we use compositor effects because we need to draw these, we need to draw with the pen in the game, and we have to draw strokes. And I wanted to be able to support 1 to 10,000 live strokes at a time, because on a 16 by 16 grid, you've got all the cells, and all the cells could have annotations and pencil marks in them. So we need to be able to support a lot. The default rendering of those in world and how I did it for my initial demo would never have scaled to this. So what we do instead is we use the compositor effect, and we inject basically a custom render pass using a normal GLSL shader. We made it depth test equal, so it's depending on the order, so you don't get any flickering. And then we also did a bunch of work to sort of compress the strokes. Oh dear, I'm trying to grab myself. We did a bunch of work to compress the strokes. The strokes are stored as delta fixed point U8s away from where you put it down. because, you know, we need to put these into a save file and other things. We made them cache friendly. We support different thicknesses and such. And our erase step is actually, our first step is we sort of paint over it. And then our next step is we erase the strokes in the background so that we're not drawing more that we need. But that's done through a latent threaded approach. So we don't spike the performance, and the user never sees the lag. So that is all the technical stuff that we had to do for Godot that piled up on us. So let's talk about our future. So we're working on our PSVR 2 port. That's in progress. Our plan is to MIT license it. Obviously, you'd still have to be a PlayStation developer. It's only probably had about a month of labor on it so far. It's not included in our 80,000 estimate, but that's a whole other thing that we're working on. So when do we actually ship? What are we actually shipping? Playable. We were playable in September 2024. Our friends and family was roughly January 2025. We hit the fast text issue, which slowed us up a bit, but that was basically when it was ready. But then we only got to early access in February 2026, which is a real bummer because, as you can imagine, it has blown out the budget for this. We are now updating the game every few weeks. Multiplayer and new modes are coming. We have a 1.0 launch roughly planned for the end of the year. And as I say, the Logitech pen support will be coming soon. That work's mostly done. Android XR and Pico are coming soon. Apple Vision Pro, probably a bit later. And then PSVR 2 will be by the end of the year with the 1.0 launch. So the real takeaways, you own all the code and bugs, right? So this means that when you use Godot, you have to take ownership for all of it, even the parts you don't want to take ownership for. And anytime you use an add-on, anytime you bring in any code, you have to take ownership for that. And that does mean that you as a studio take on more work because it is not maintained under the same kind of commercial license that you would if you were working with Unity or Unreal. But you also have ownership, so you can fix the things, which is great. The other thing I'd say is if you're trying to hit a certain level of quality, you're going to end up forking. Plan for it, build a good process around it, acknowledge it, try minimize the amount of forking you're going to do, but acknowledge that this is a reality, this is going to happen. Compliance is compulsory, whether it is legal compliance for things like GDPR or whether it is console compliance. One of the biggest things indies always fail at is you do not read the PlayStation or Xbox or Steam or Meta or whatever docs that say you've got to be able to unplug the controller and plug it back in. You've got to be able to do this. Literally, if you're whatever platform you're shipping on, they have a document. You can go download it, and it'll literally tell you every test that they test your game for. So nothing should be a surprise. There's no gotchas. They're trying to make it as easy as possible, and they have to be very specific because it's a legal requirement. Rewrite your hot path. Godot allows you to prototype extremely fast, but to deliver commercial XR, you're going to end up moving a lot of stuff to C++, moving some stuff to shaders. You know, this is just the reality, is you're going to be doing a lot of performance optimization. That is the state, that is VR. Upstream when you can, because this is the other thing I'd say, that 80,000 number would probably be a lot smaller if we didn't try to give it back. I'd say generally whatever the problem you hit is, it'll be, say, I don't know, 10 hours for you to fix it for your game, but then it'll be 30 to 50 hours to fix it for everyone and to make a PR and get a PR accepted and run through the whole review process. So that's the thing you have to acknowledge. We're probably going to be still trying to give back to the community and posting the work we do on our blog, and for the XR team where I'm more embedded, I'll probably still be doing work there where I can, but we're probably going to try not submit PRs as much because it's just, we can't afford it. We just can't. We'll try and make it all available. I do want to give back. I just that additional cost multiplier is a big deal for us. So do we continue with Godot? Probably, maybe. The cost is real. The freedom's real as well. It's really nice to be free. But even after we've done all of this, we are not hitting the performance of Unity or the quality of Unreal. We're missing a lot of features that both have. I don't think I'd ever go to Unity, but I could definitely see us moving to Unreal, or I could see us basically taking Godot and going sideways and branching quite hard there. It's a longer conversation. I really like Godot. I really like the community. I really like giving back. I believe in what Godot stands for. But again, we do need to make money and we do need to survive. So that's kind of the challenge. I do think it's doable. And as I say, one of the things I think that'll make it doable for us is basically giving up on PRs is one of the things that we've basically started to do now. And that's a recent thing, but I think that's a reality. But this is one of the things I wanted to add into the deck because I was really worried about how negative the end of the talk was. Is some advice. My first bit of advice is a question. Can you go PC VR first? The hardest part for small teams making a VR game is finishing the fucking game. Okay, because VR is hard, performance is hard, making a game is hard, making a commercial game to completion is hard. So if you're able to dev the entire game as a PC VR title, maybe do that. You'll have less performance issues. The pipeline will be easier. Godot works better. And I'll also say piracy on Quest is very high. Now, it's not going to be a solution to everyone's game. For our particular game, we have to be on every platform. It's the only thing that makes sense for a game like ours. The other thing I'll say is downporting is hard, but it probably isn't impossible, right? Think about that. So, for example, the digging game that I showed you early on, if you want to eventually ship that on to Quest, you've got to day one sort of test it on Quest and think, okay, what is Quest capable of? Is this even a game that could be done on Quest? But for example, most games, the core mechanics aren't tied into performance. So like the Sudoku game that we're doing now, the Magic Shop game, most of the game ideas people will have are not at the bleeding edge of technology. And if you make a game and it's successful and you get a publisher or you just get an audience, downporting to Quest, it's doable, and the advice everyone gives everyone and has been giving everyone for a long time is start with your weakest platform and go up. And I would have given this advice a while ago, but I think given the nature of where VR is, given how hard VR is, and also just speaking to the audience I'm speaking to, I would say if you think your game can work on PC VR, I would target that first. And then once the game is, maybe not when the game's shipped, but once the game is very far along, then maybe look at bringing it to standalone headsets and figuring out, okay, what graphics do we have to cut out? What do we have to do to make that happen? Because especially with the limitations of Godot, you're probably in a better place avoiding standalone. Spec out your tricky features and then look through Godot and find out where you're going to get bit. Right, character rendering and animation in Godot, it's improving, but it is nowhere near Unity, let alone Unreal's quality. And players will notice. And players don't care what tech you've built on. So look at all the kind of features you want to hit. Find the things that are going to be the things that could sync your idea or sync your game. Find those specific features. Also things like open world or streaming I/O stuff. Look very closely at Godot and what that's going to cost you. Then also look and think hard about asset stores and prefabs, because this is one of the things that if you're in Unity or Unreal, there's a lot of pre-made stuff you can bring in that'll kickstart the game and speed you up massively. Now Godot is working on that. Godot is very good at getting you off the starting block very quickly. The difference is that when you get one of these prefabs in, a lot of these prefabs are like commercial grade, in the sense of they do all of the things. They're already tied up to leaderboards. They're already tied up to all the bits that you need tied up to. So, you know, as much as you want to do that, you're going to be competing with studios who are using Unity and they're pulling stuff off the shelf and they're plugging it into their game. And yeah, maybe yours is 5% better, but is that 5% going to be enough for you to compete in the market? So it's a tough question, because I think if it is enough better, and I don't know where that number is, then yes, it is. But again, we get into that cost equation. And then also team experience and talent. It is harder to hire good people who are very experienced in Godot, because industry professionals aren't generally at the moment. It's changing. It's a lot better now than it was even 2 years ago. There's a lot of really good people now who are experienced in Godot, and good people can always pick it up. But the difference is that if you're hiring for a Unity or an Unreal Engine developer, or just a technical artist or whatever, they hit the ground running a lot faster and they're a lot easier to find. And if you're collaborating with a co-dev studio, they've probably got the experience. So de-risking, you need to get, for Godot, you need to get it to a solid playable as soon as you can, because you need to prove to people this thing can be done in Godot, including yourself. You need to know the expected pain points ahead of time. You shouldn't be surprised when the investors ask you the specific questions. You should know what those things are. Sooner rather than later, speak to studios that do porting. Speak to co-dev studios with Godot experience. Try feel out that technical side of it. Fork, stable, and pick. So fork the engine from wherever you're working, because this is now the version you're working on. Once you're past that like first prototyping phase, you know, like lock in. You're on Godot 4.6, you're on Godot 4.5, whatever. You're now locked in on that. And then only pick the things that you absolutely need to pick from main to get the kind of performance you need. Because anytime you upgrade that engine, you're taking in a whole bunch of code that you then need to review and figure out. Are there any new problems here? And maybe eventually you do upgrade, but that's a whole process, and that's a whole QA cycle, and it can sink a lot of time. Find funding partners with Godot experience. Find partners generally with Godot experience, even if it's making trailers. And then find other people invested in Godot. Pigs, not chickens. This is an old Scrum thing. You know, I can't remember the joke, but it's something like the chicken turns to the pig and says, "Oh, we should open a breakfast place. What are we going to serve? Ham and eggs." And the pig goes, "Yeah, you're interested, but I'm invested." Because, you know, if you're dealing with people who have an interest in Godot, or, you know, a toe into Godot or whatever, you know, that's lovely. But if you're betting your studio on Godot, you're invested, you're a pig, and your risk is much higher. So if you can find other people who are dependent or invested, they are pigs, then work with them. I really wish there's a better word for that than pigs and chickens, because pigs has got the negative connotations, but hey. And then finally, questions. I don't think we'll have any, but if you do, you can always reach out to me on Blue Sky. I'm on X, I'm on most things. If you're interested in fun stories, I did a comic about game dev stories a while back. This is like 2019, 18, whenever, called Game Dev Nell, True Stories from Making Games. And yeah, there's a QR code there for the game. Also, because this is not an in-person talk, because this is an internet talk, I can do the thing where I put the link in chat. But yeah, that is the extended form of talk, and that is it there, recorded for the future if anyone is interested in this, and they can scrub through it nice and fast. But yeah, that's the talk, folks. I'm gonna burn a few minutes to see if anyone has a question from chat. I've not seen any, so I'll go through there. Oh well, it's an earlier one. What general genres are good and which are inherently bad for VR? I don't think that there's any genre that couldn't be done in VR in some way. There are definitely genres that are easier and harder. It's also like who you're trying to target. I think the primary thing is, if you're someone who plays VR, like actually plays it, and you think it's a good idea, it's probably a good idea, right? The key thing is not to talk to people who are, they like the idea of VR. Talk to people who are actually playing VR games. The other thing is, I think a lot of people over-index on, I'm making a VR game, so everything has to be VR. And so a great example in our title was when we first did this, we pitched the idea of writing the numbers on the Sudoku board and then OCRing them. And we're still building out that tech, and we've got some prototypes where we had it working back in the day. The truth is, though, you don't want to do that. It's much easier just to hold a button and go floop, 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 and select the numbers and minimum wrist movement. And that was the thing that, is makes the better game. So yeah, no, there's a lot of things, I think, there's a lot of things that aren't like inherently VR, like, as I say, our puzzle game, that I think work really well in VR, and others platformers with like Lucky's Tale and all that kind of stuff. But I think there is a whole range of genres that come through. Obviously, anytime you're dealing with a cockpit, you are going to have more sense of comfort because there's the whole simulator scenario. But I think that is also, it has advantages and disadvantages, is the short version. I don't think it's inherently great. I think you just need to look at when we first started doing 3D games, everything was super 3D. And then it's like, oh, does it have to be super 3D? Can it just be kind of 3D? So there's a range there. But yeah, I think all genres can kind of work. Open-ended question: why you choose to stick with VR, and what's the most fun part? I love fucking VR because I actually enjoy it as a medium. The other thing is, I've been doing this a long time, and VR is the thing that excites me. VR really excites me. If I was to pick two things that excite me the most in video games, or three things, I'd probably pick multiplayer systems, VR, and novel control systems, or persistence, actually, probably persistence. I'm a big fan of persistence, so I got really big into roguelikes, and I got really big into MMOs and stuff. But you've got to also build what you can build as a studio. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, no, I'm in VR for the long haul. There's definitely other places I could be doing things. I've made career sacrifices to continue in VR because I really fucking love VR, and I'm not going anywhere. As long as I can afford to make VR, I'll make VR. Okay, I think that is that, folks. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to end the broadcast, and thanks for dropping in. And for those of you who are watching the VOD, I hope you enjoyed fast forward in through the boring parts. Take care. Check out Augmental Puzzles. It is available. You know what? I will just go to, boop. There we go. Augmental Puzzles. It's there. We just released our latest patch was our Smart Hints patch with the tutorial and everything. We are going to be doing some more stuff soon. We update pretty frequently, so follow along and